not just maybe they're I assume that it's by uniform and stuff like as usual in a shooter, but if I see the base of one faction compared to another,
they're definitely different. This one's these guys are them and the stalkers kind of are the same, right? They're just kind of loners, hang out. But when you get to the ones that are more militaristic, they definitely have a different feel to them.
Yeah, and all right. I was going to say not to get too highfalutin, but I am going to get highfalutin. We've talked a lot about just how architecture reflects culture and how that visually communicates information to players. So, speaking in general about how in a faction system, communicating everything about the faction is so important to communicate to the player, right? But like every channel that you have to represent what it's all about and what its relationship with the player is something that I want to think about a lot.
One of the things that me and a couple of the other designers were talking about when it came to the factions is, we're working on their backstory right now, and the place I always start with, whether it's for this game or building Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, is what is this faction's creation story? How do they believe that they became part? So it's almost starting with their core belief and then kind of building up from there, right? Dwarves are from stone, right? We all know that stories. How does that end up affecting their culture?
Yeah, right? I think that's equally applicable for in a game like Stalker. It's obviously not the same as dwarves and elves, but each faction is going to have an idea about like why it is that they're together, right? Like what made them a faction and what makes them all part of a larger thing. Just as sort of on a larger scale, nations have their stories about what their identity is, right? I think all groups you can find analogs to that sort of kind of foundational mythology.
This is one thing that Stalker does do a lot. Unfortunately, it does crash a lot.
Please stand by.
So for one of our creation myths, can we have a giant tortoise?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, now you've spoiled the mock turtles. And if you get any of these references, you've been watching some of our videos.
Let's take some questions. Does anybody have any questions about? Why would that get said? So does anybody have any questions for us about factions or anything? We are open books. No comment.
Better ask some good questions, otherwise we'll continue to ramble on. Talk about mock turtles.
There's an important difference between a mock tortoise and a mock turtle.
Tell us about the mock tortoise.
All right. Well, you're in the desert, see, and you see a mock tortoise. What you may ask is a mock tortoise.
What is a mock tortoise?
You know what a mock turtle is?
Tell me, Tim.
It's the same thing. You turn the mock tortoise over and it's struggling. Surely you saw that coming, Chris.
Yeah. Underworld Ascendant factions. The three main factions are the Dark Elves, the Dwarves, and the Shamblers. And and there'll be some minor factions that will be wandering about. I just scope float.
Well, no, I mean it does sort of raise the question of like, what do we mean by a faction? 'Cause we do have other cultures that that we've already definitely announced, right? Like the Lizardmen, one of our stretch goals. The Dire Fairies, the object of one of our votes, right? So we have other kind of intelligent races. Um, and I guess we could talk a little bit about what we mean there about the distinction there between that and a faction. I don't know. Should I jump in, or do you want to start, Paul?
At a high level, we chose to do 3 factions that we focus on, that the player could really have some deeper interactions with and ally with, and sort of push the needle with each faction and how they relate to each other. So you can kind of get into the mix between the 3 factions as the player and evolve the story. But it's really with those 3 factions that interaction goes on between the player. With the Lizardmen, it's not to that level. They're a faction, but they're kind of doing their own thing, and the player can come and go, but they're not going to be involved in the outcome of this story for the game.
I guess sort of the way that you'd make the distinction between great powers, and I'm not going to name any country that I don't consider a great power because I would just insult people from that country. But oh, he went there. We've lost our Estonian audience. Which is too bad because we're big in Europe. Actually, we love our European fans. Oh. Ooh. Yeah, good question. Like to how we communicate that. And we talked a little bit earlier about some of the patterns that you see a lot in other games, right? Where an RPG typically is not going to have a sort of dedicated user interface element for that kind of thing. The conventional approach would be more to have certain NPCs who you go to for certain kinds of information. But I think it's still a very open question. I definitely like some of the observations that we made here with Stalker in terms of just like something as simple as how a group reacts to you walking around with a weapon at the ready, right? That their responses to that give you some sort of, it's low quality, but it's very omnipresent kind of information, right? That by repetition and the fact that it's just kind of everywhere around you when you're in their space is useful for kind of different things than a UI screen is useful for. Any other thoughts?
Well, I was going to jump to the next question, seventh key. Interesting question about whether a faction will act towards you in a uniform way, in the same way, so that if you wrong one dwarf, then all dwarfs are your enemy. It's a great question. I think to some degree, yes. I mean, your reputation is sort of, you'll build a reputation. So to the degree that a faction views you as an opponent vying against them, that will become common knowledge, among the dwarves. If you're taking on the dwarves, I guess the question is whether we'll have any individual, variants. Whether some dwarves will be a little more open-minded than others.
I think it's. I don't want to commit to anything like that. Obviously, it's very early to say, but I'd hate as well to sort of make all dwarves kind of homogenous in their opinion, right? Like one of the things that I think you have to be free to write characters to be themselves, right? And so if you have a dwarf who's contrary in some of his opinions, right, that's something that I want to be open to respecting.
But also, we had talked about this in some design session some weeks ago, is that it's not necessarily an all or nothing thing in terms of a faction. They adore you or they hate you. It's just a binary switch. So there might be degrees And so it may be that if you start to get on the wrong side of, say, the dwarves, that uh, as you start to go down that path, some of the dwarves, will give you the cold shoulder or just outright be hostile towards you. Others kind of more neutral. But the further you push that, you know, the more and more the dwarves will just across the board, you know, shun you or see you as an outright enemy.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty workable approach to that problem. I see another question here from our viewer, Platinum-oxity. An interesting question in terms of how faction mechanics interact with stealth mechanics, right? In that stealth has a sort of implicit underlying assumption about permission, right? Like where are you allowed to be and what are you allowed to be doing, which is something that's obviously like very very relevant to your relationship with whatever group has a sense of ownership of the space you're in or the stuff you're interacting with. Um, I think that's sort of gets into the wider issue of what the social rewards are of having the regard of a faction, whether it's access to a particular space or another resource, and how we communicate to the player that they have that kind of access. Um, and then on the flip side, there's a whole other issue there where the mere act of acting stealthily is kind of suspicious, and if you if you do that in an area where you are permitted to be, like what kind of odd reactions you might get from people. That's one of the things that is kind of very easy to push against the boundaries in a game of this sort.
Tim, I don't recall. We didn't have areas in the original Underworlds which were the AIs saw as, oh, you're not allowed here. It's restricted. You as an avatar shouldn't be here. I can't remember. But
I think the Green Goblins on level 1 had one area that was barred off. I wasn't sure that I don't remember if it was an area where they would react badly to you going there, or it was just a matter of it was locked away until you put some effort into establishing yourself with them.
don't hold me to it. But the latter was my recollection, that it wasn't an area that if they noticed you in, they'd get very upset. But it's an interesting concept whether we wanted to have certain areas that were considered sacred areas. Say the Shamblers had an area that humans were just not supposed to be there, and so if you came and snuck in and they happened to catch you, whether that would upset them.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings up the topic, and our viewer Rustbite brings this up of disguise as it relates to all this, right? Like, is there a way to foil the faction system to any extent, right? Which is basically what the purpose of disguise is. He mentions Hitman. I remember also in Fallout New Vegas that was a mechanic they had in terms of the putting on the uniforms of one faction or another.
So clearly, we need to have merchants who sell like full costumes. So you can have a Shambler mushroom costume, rubber costume you could wear, or lizard men. Depending on the quality of the costume, there's a chance that they'll catch it.
I'll get you a task estimate for that later, Paul.
All right, how about one more question, and then we're gonna call it a day. Will's about to walk into a couple of anomalies here. He's got his trusty screws to show his way. All right.
You're managing to survive a little better now. You're getting better at this game.
Just in time to end the stream.
All right, if there's no other questions, we're gonna call it an afternoon.
Thanks everyone for being with us.
Yes, thanks for showing up.
And this is Chris Siegel, senior producer, and Tim Stelmach, lead designer, founder, and Will Patsy. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you soon. Bye.